31st, the author of the book called Calendar. And what a fascinating book this is. Here we are on the second day of this new year with all the Millennium talk going on. But did you know that the year 2000 actually arrived at 9 p.m. on December 31st, 1997? Huh? Did you know that? Uh-huh. The year 2000 has already come, gang. It arrived at 9 p.m. on December 31st, 1997, and David Duncan's going to explain it to us. David is the author of this fascinating book called Calendar. It tells you the history of how our calendar was created. And David, I have to admit, this is one of those things that if you would have asked me was I interested in this, I might have said no, but what a fascinating book because of all the things that went into this calendar. Congratulations on a great job.
Thank you.
What's your background in terms of why did you write this book?
Well, I've written on a number of subjects. I'm a journalist and a science reporter and do some television as well for ABC News. And I just got interested. I've long been interested in the history of time and what it all means, but it seemed like a rather enormous subject to tackle, so the calendar gave me a bit of a narrative line to follow. It's a pretty short book. Kind of races through a lot of history, but telling a story about something that we take for granted but don't realize all the fun stories behind.
I can imagine what you're going to answer in terms of this question, because we talk about the big Millennium celebration coming up, whether it's 2000 or 2001, and when do we celebrate it. And pretty much what I got out of your book was, who cares?
Well, that's my personal opinion in some ways. I think we need these markers every so often, century years, 50 years. Gosh, we seem to be doing it like every 5 years in some ways. I think we got so much going on right now in our culture that we need these little markers to stop and go, hey, wait a minute, what's going on? Certainly the Millennium is an enormous marker, but It is just a number, 2000.
And it's not an accurate number.
No, it's not even an accurate. We've sort of agreed that that's the Millennium, when in fact... if you do the math, there are a number of other candidates for the year 2000. Well, but that's the one we've all agreed on.
Okay, as I started the show, if you technically calculate it, we've already passed the Millennium. It happened in 1997.
That's right. That's one of the many wonderful stories about the calendar. And apparently, at least according to biblical scholars, Christ was probably born more like 4 B.C. I know that sounds a little strange. He was born before he was born, but... in that particular year, due to some clues in the Bible. And there was a fellow in the 6th century named Dennis the Little who came up with this whole idea of starting with year 1 with Christ's birth. And the fact is that he got the date wrong. Mm-hmm. And if you, again, run through the math on the thing, we're talking about probably 1996 or 97 that the year 2000 actually arrived, if you want to get technical.
Right. Now, there was no year 0, correct?
That's right. When Dennis was mucking around with time back in the 6th century, there was no concept of 0. Latin doesn't need a 0 or have a 0 in it, so that came much later. And in fact, we go, strangely enough, from 1 BC to 1 AD in our calendar without a 0.
Right. And so I read these letters to the editor now where they're complaining that if you're celebrating on December 31st of 1999, you're not really getting ready for the Millennium because it doesn't start till 2001. But they're even wrong because we're years off based on a mistake that somebody made hundreds and hundreds of years ago.
That's exactly right. And where they get the year 2001 is because we don't have a 0, and you start with 1, and if you add the number 2000 to 1, you get 2001. Right. Yeah. But again, who cares?
I'd like you to pick apart today. Okay, I want you to tell us where we got these things. For instance, today's Saturday. Where did we get Saturday from?
Well, the days of the week come from long, long ago in ancient Mesopotamia, which is Iraq today, but back then it was Samaria and Babylon, and they just simply gave each day a name based on their planet gods, and that's why you get Sunday, for instance, is named after the sun, Monday after the moon, and Saturday comes from the Latins' god Saturn, which when the Romans picked up this same date scheme, they transposed the Latin names. And later on, the Germanic tribes that took over Britain after the fall of Rome added on some of their names, like Tu for Tuesday. These are all sort of obscure northern German gods that we're all still using today. But Saturn comes from the god Saturn.
So today we're celebrating a God's Day.
Exactly. And in fact, one of the reasons that Saturday is a day that we don't go to work is because the Romans considered Saturn to be a sort of sour god. He with this ancient god, and they were all a little afraid of him, so they didn't go to work.
Okay, this is January, the month of January. Where did we come up with that?
That comes from the god Janus, which is another Roman god, and Janus is a god that has two faces, one looking forward and one looking back, so that makes sense for the first month of the year.
This is the second, but I believe in the way the calendar used to be written, this was something like the 5th of Nuns or something like that. Right? I mean, originally the calendar did not say the second. It said something different, didn't it?
That's right. Again, our calendar is basically the Roman calendar, and we didn't have this scheme of counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or at least the Romans didn't. In fact, they didn't use it in Europe until around the Renaissance. They had this crazy calendar, which I won't even get into in detail because it's just too crazy and complicated. But we've all heard of the Ides of March.
Right.
Well, they had certain days of the month, like the Ides and the Nones, as you just mentioned, and they would count the days before those days coming up. So the Nones, I think, would have been January 5th, and we would have been saying this was 3 days before Nones. That's what people would have been saying. We wouldn't have been saying January 2nd. They would have been saying 3 Nones.
Yeah, and so every month had an Ides in it.
That's right.
So even though Shakespeare made the Ides of March famous, every month had Ides.
That's right. It started, the first day of every month was called the Calends, which my understanding meant the announcement, which was when the Roman calendar was a lunar calendar, there would be somebody standing up on Capitoline Hill looking to see when the new moon came, and they would yell out, Calends, Calends, and that was the beginning of that month.
Yeah. Our guest is David Duncan. He's the author of the book Calendar. It tells us how we got everything about everything in terms of our time. And David, I was fascinated to learn about why certain months have certain numbers of days, because we all just assume, well, somebody figured this out, but it isn't quite as easy as that. February has 28 days for a specific reason, and also they kind of messed things up. It was supposed to be every other month would have 30 days, and then the next month 31. It was supposed to trade off back and forth, and then somebody kind of messed with the formula, right?
Well, one of the wonderful things about time is we think it's set in motion, but in fact it's something that people have used and abused for religious reasons, for power and ego, and this happens to be an ego trip here, the reason that we have to fool around with this calendar. Julius Caesar came up with a basic calendar, and he did organize the months, as you said, which was a very nice organized way. There were also 29 days in February under his calendar, and 30 in a leap year. And what happened was, when he died, his supporters named the month of July after him, Julius, July. And the next emperor was Augustus, and Augustus's supporters wanted to name a month after him as well. They chose August, but at that time it only had 30 days. It now has 31, so they snatched a day out of February, making it 28 days. Added a date August, and then basically the Roman Senate changed everything around and jiggered it all around, and now we're stuck with this sort of...
It ended up being political. If I recall, July had 31 days, and they didn't want Augustus Caesar to be any lower than Julius, and so they forced a day away from February and moved it to August. So instead of switching back and forth, now we've got a couple months in a row of 31.
Exactly.
Why do we have the year begin in January and not March? Because in the original calendar, March was the first month.
Well, that's right. Back, the fellow who came up with the month scheme was Romulus, who founded Rome way back around 753 B.C., and he really enjoyed the number 10. That was his favorite number.
Right.
And that's why, in fact, we have a base 10 system even today. But a lot of people said it was because he was a great warrior, but all he could do was count to 10 on his fingers, and then he had to stop. And he designated 10 months. And the problem with having 10 months of roughly 30 days is it doesn't match up at all to a 365-day year. And so they had a year that was, a couple months short, and every year it would start falling backward, summer back into spring and spring back into winter. So another king, actually it was the next king named Numa, had to come around and add on these 2 months. But for a long time, even up until the 18th century, some countries in Europe were still using March as their first month.
See, it doesn't make sense because October means 8, but it's not the 8th month anymore. Now it's the 10th month.
That's right, and we can thank Romulus for that.
Right.
He numbered
he numbered the months. October, November, December are 8, 9, 10.
That's right.
And yet they no longer fall 8, 9, 10 in terms of the months. They're now 10, 11, and 12.
This is what's so fun about all this, because this was a mistake made, 1,700 or 2,700 years ago, and we're still suffering from it today.
Well, and that's what made me wonder. They made big political decisions, church decisions in order to change all this. Why can't we change it today? I mean, obviously the calendar isn't perfect at this point. Why can't we switch it around?
Well, I think, and I thought a lot about this, I think that we get very conservative where time is concerned. I mean, it is strange. There have been lots of ideas for instance, fixing the lengths of the months, as we talked about. Our quarters are a different length, which causes all sorts of minor problems, anybody doing a tax return or whatever. I think that we just don't want to know that time can be changed around. This is what I've come to conclude talking to lots of people, and it's almost a philosophical
We want security,
stance.
Yeah. I was fascinated to read that much of the calendar is based really on Christian tradition. And the reason we have our calendar is because of a pope and some monks and some priests who really utilized the latest in science at the time to change the calendar, right?
Well, that's right. It was originally the calendar of the Roman Empire, and when Rome fell, the church kept the calendar as its official church calendar. And over the centuries, there were a number of sort of unsung heroes, various monks and scholars who tinkered with the calendar and actually tried to fix it because it became the official calendar of the church, and there were some mistakes built in that Julius Caesar had made, and it was difficult for the church to change those for many years. But finally they did. The main mistake was that Caesar started a calendar year of 365 and a quarter days, and that's where we get our leap year every fourth year.
Isn't that right?
Yeah, well, the problem is that the year is actually slightly less than that. It's about 11 minutes less than 365 and a quarter.
Come on, David, 11 minutes, that doesn't mean anything, does it?
Well, you wouldn't think so, especially back at the 400s or something. Nobody even has a watch to take care of.
But if you add up 11 minutes a year, every year, all of a sudden days start shifting.
That's right. Over many centuries, you drop days, and you start again having summer fall back into spring, and especially if you're maintaining a religious calendar, you've got Easter on the wrong day, all the holy days on the wrong days.
Right.
So what happened was a lot of people figured this out, but it took a while to convince the Catholic Church to change it, and it didn't happen until 1582 when Pope Gregory XIII decided to fix the calendar by simply removing 10 days that the calendar was out of sync.
So there actually was no October 5th to 14th in the year 1582. They just totally removed the days from the calendar.
That's exactly right. The calendar, by the way, is something that we make up to try to come as close as we can to the year as measured by the Earth's movements. And that's why we're talking about keeping the calendar in sync with the Earth's movements, with the seasons. And that's right. He just simply you went to bed on the night of the 4th of October 1582, and you woke up on the 15th.
Wow. Now, what about people with birthdays? Didn't some people shift their birthdays then, too?
Yes. In fact, everyone did who was alive at that time had to shift it 10 days back. And Great Britain, many of the countries in Europe which were not Catholic didn't change for quite a while. And in fact, England waited until 1752, almost 200 years later. And one of our most prominent birthdays on our calendar, which is George Washington's birthday, he was actually born before this correction was made in Britain, and by that time they had to correct 11 days. So he was actually born 11 days earlier than when we celebrate it today.
You're kidding.
No. So he would have thought of himself as...
Because of the calendar change, because of the correction they did in the 1700s, George Washington was not actually born when we celebrate it.
That's right. He was born on his calendar 11 days earlier, but then when they switched it, he had to switch it like everyone else.
So some of us that are into ancestral history, when we go back and look back in the 1700s in England, maybe if we find a date, we've got to establish whether that is before the calendar change was made or not.
Well, if you're looking at the actual primary source, a diary or some kind of record back then, that's right. In fact, it's even more complicated because if you have British ancestral history, they started their year up until 1752 on March 25th. So if you're looking at March 24th, you're actually in a different year, right?
So your ancestor may have been born on a certain date in a certain year, and in reality, that's not the same date and year that they would be considered today.
Right. You can begin to see how complicated this all gets, trying to work it all out.
And then, of course, others took a while to catch up, too. So essentially, this Pope decided in the 1500s, it took hundreds of years for others to gradually change. And even in the 20th century, we've had some major countries that have just decided to change more recently, right?
That's right. Most countries and cultures obviously had their own calendars. We're talking about the world's calendar today was the European calendar, and it was only a kind of fluke of history that ended up being the world's calendar. It came at the time of European colonialism, and it was spread around the world. But it wasn't until 1949 that the last major country in the world switched over to this, and that was China.
Wow.
And Mao Zedong changed the calendar when he took Beijing during the Communist Revolution there and announced that this would be the calendar of China, and that pretty much got everyone on board for...
Well, I know we still have, for instance, we hear of a year in the Jewish calendar, like I believe it's 5759 right now in the Jewish calendar. Or the Eastern Orthodox Church, don't they still celebrate it the old way?
Most of them do. They don't have a central church like Rome, and different churches do different things, but most of them still celebrate at least the major holidays like Easter. I think it's running 13 or 14 days behind our calendar now. So
now it came out in the news this weekend, this last week, of course, that we added 1 second to the new year.
That's right.
They had to make an adjustment. So
a leap second.
A leap second.
Yeah, my book is called The Epic Struggle to Determine a True and Accurate Year. That's the subtitle, and it's a whole long story of how we try to get this calendar right against the true year, the astronomic year. And the irony is that we've actually overshot the mark because we now use atomic time, and this can split down time to a trillionth or a billionth of a second. That's how accurate it is. But in fact, the Earth itself, which is our ultimate clock, the seasons, is not that accurate because it's wobbling and wiggling a little bit as it orbits around the sun, and it's not accurate to within a billionth of a second.
So you're saying 1 year is not exactly the same as the next?
That's right. And well, remember, the Earth is a natural object, just like anything else. I mean, you don't, butterfly might go left or right when it's flying. It's doing what it wants to do, and it's being pulled by the gravitation of the sun and the moon and other objects. So it's slightly off. We're talking about maybe 10,000th of a second a year, but
those add up.
They do add up, and you need to drop those seconds or add them in this case.
Now, of course, we've got a leap year coming up in 2000. I thought that century leap years were eliminated, though.
Well, Pope Gregory's, one of his reforms to try to get rid of that 11 minutes we talked about earlier was to remove the leap years from century years, but he only removed them from 3 out of 4. So 1600, 1700, and 1800 were not, 1700, 1800, and 1900 were not leap years, but the year 2000 will be.
How totally confusing.
Exactly. If anyone is still following this.
Isn't this absolutely amazing to see how confusing this is simply to set up a day-by-day calendar?
Yeah, this is just 12 pages with 365 little boxes that hang on the wall.
And I think the key is what you just alluded to. It changes. The Earth does not have an exact, steady rotation, and therefore it changes slightly, so we have to constantly make little adjustments. And because they didn't make certain adjustments or miscalculated years and years ago, we've had to adjust ever since then.
That's right. That's right.
So what's the solution, David, as we summarize all this? What's your grand scheme or your great idea? What can we do to change all this and make it less complicated?
Well, as I said, there are lots of different plans, but I think really we could make the months easier, that sort of thing. But the long and the short of it is that we all have agreed that this calendar is fine, most of us. I mean, if we wanted to change it, we would, but we've collectively decided that these little problems don't matter so much, and I think we just muddle on through. If we want to call the year 2000 the Millennium, we do it. And I think it's fascinating. And, in an age of technology where everything is so precise, that we just simply want something to happen, and 6 billion people decide, okay, that's what we'll do.
But those who want to sit and argue over whether it's 2000 or 2001, you say?
Well, they can go ahead and argue about it, but I think the big party is going to be in the year 2000.
Well, and what you're saying, I think, in the book is the party should have happened in 1997 because we're really that far off in terms of our actual calendar.
No, that's right. And if you do want to get technical about it, we are that far off, and officially it would be 2001 anyway. But we love those zeros.
That's right. That's right. Thanks so much, David. I really appreciate you being with us today.
Take care. Thank you.
It's David Duncan, the author of the book Calendar on Winsenberg on the Weekend.